Hi, students. I'm going to start the reading. I'm going to continue the John Burroughs reading of the Weasel. But first, we're going to talk about the moon. I couldn't see it tonight. I tried really hard and nothing. So the moon must be coming up later. Maybe it'll be coming up in the morning. All right, I have the calendar for you to look at. And we went past the first quarter, and now on the 14th, and so now we're heading, we're waning. We're heading toward that new moon on Earth Day, the 22nd. So we have waning crescents all the way until we hit that new moon. And one of the things that helps me remember some of these changes in the moon is after the new moon, you start with waxing crescents and you go through the whole cycle, and then you end the cycle with waning crescents. And then there's gibbuses in between and the quarters. But it just helps me to think about the crescents. It starts with waxing crescents and it ends with waning crescents. For those that like to see the whole pattern, I colored in up to here. Anna and Ingrid and Anders' mom, Mrs. Abrahamson, said that she went online and she found, I think it was from NASA, a moon calendar, and you color it in, but all the circles are on there, which would be nice. I haven't looked it up yet, if anybody's interested. But right now, here's my colored in versions of right down here we're starting. We had the last quarter, and then we have the waning crescents. Light is on the left as it's waning, and that'll continue all the way to the new moon. It just gets smaller and smaller with the crescent. Hope you're doing all right. Hope you had a nice Easter. And I hope you're enjoying some of the outdoor time. Well, some of the weather that's nice in between all the rain. Definitely getting some spring rain. All right. Jaden told me that the author of this book, this John Burroughs, is like a great uncle. So he's related to this wonderful man that writes so well about animal adventures. We're reading about the weasel. And Mr. Burroughs had observed a weasel, if you remember, going back and forth with little field mice. And he just wanted to see where he stashed them, all these mice. And he dug and he dug and he dug. And did he ever find the stash? No, he just found caverns and caverns of tunnels and got very tired. So now let's find out about some other weasel stories. A few years later, I had another adventure with a weasel that had its den in a bank on the margin of a muck swamp in the same neighborhood. We had cleared and drained and redeemed the swamp and made it into a garden. And I had built me a lodge there. The weasel's hunting grounds were doubtless. He had been wont to gather his supply of mice, had been destroyed, and he had got even with me by preying upon my young chickens. So they took a swamp area and they redeemed it, he says. And they made it into a garden. And he figures this weasel is getting even with him because he took away some of his hunting grounds. Night after night, the number of chickens grew less, till one day we chanced to see the creature boldly chasing one of the larger fowls along the road near the hen house. His career was cut short then and there by one of the men. We were then ignorant of the den in the bank a few yards away. The next season, my chickens were preyed upon again. They were killed upon the roost, and their half-eaten bodies were found under the floor. One night I was awakened about midnight by that loud, desperate cry which a barn fowl gives when suddenly seized upon its roost. Was I dreaming, or was that a cry of murder from my chickens? I seized my lantern and with my dog rushed out to where a pair of nearly grown roosters passed the night upon a low stump. They were both gone, and the action of the dog betrayed the fresh scent of some animal. But we could get no clue to the chickens or their enemy. I felt sure that only one of the fowls had been seized, and that the other had dashed away wildly in the darkness, which proved to be the case. The dead chicken was there under the edge of the stump, where I found it in the morning, and its companion came forth unhurt during the day. Thenceforth, the chickens, big and little, were all shut up in the hen house at night. On the third day, the appetite of the weasel was keen again, and it boldly gave chase to a chicken before our eyes. I was standing in my porch with my dog, talking with my neighbor and his wife, who, with their dog, were standing in the road a few yards in front of me. A chicken suddenly screamed in the bushes up behind the rocks just beyond my friends. Then it came rushing down over the rocks past them, flying and screaming, closely pursued by a long, slim, red animal that seemed to slide over the rocks like a serpent. Its legs were so short that one saw only the swift gliding motion of its body. Across the road into the garden, within a yard of my friends, went the pursued and the pursuer, and into the garden rushed I and my dog. The weasel seized the chicken by the wing, and was being dragged along by the latter in its effort to escape, when I arrived upon the scene. With a savage glee I had not felt for many a day, I planted my foot upon the weasel. The soft muck underneath yielded, and I held him without hurting him. He let go his hold upon the chicken and seized the sole of my shoe in his teeth. Then I reached down and I gripped him with my thumb and forefinger just back of the ears, and I lifted him up and looked his impotent rage in the face. What gleaming eyes! What an array of threatening teeth! What reaching of vicious claws! What a wriggling and convulsed body! But I held him firmly. He could only scratch my hand and dart fire from his electric bead-like eyes. In the meantime, my dog was bounding up, begging to be allowed to have his way with the weasel. But I knew what he did not. I knew that in anything like a fair encounter, the weasel would get the first hold, would draw the first blood, and hence probably escape would probably effect his escape. So I carried the animal, writhing and scratching, to a place in the road, removed from any rear and near cover, and threw him violently upon the ground, hoping thereby so to stun and bewilder him, so that the terrier could rush in and crush him before he recovered his wits. But I had miscalculated. The blow did indeed stun and confuse him, but he was still too quick for the dog, and had him by the lip like an electric trap. Nip lifted up his head and swung the weasel violently about in the air, trying to shake him off, uttering a cry of rage and pain, but did not succeed in loosening the animal's hold for some moments. When he had done so and attempted to seize him a second time, the weasel was first again, but quickly released hold and darted about this way and that, seeking cover. 3 or 4 times the dog was upon him, but found him each time too hot to be held. Seeing that the creature was likely to escape, I set my foot upon him again, and I made a finish of him. The weasel is the boldest and most bloodthirsty of our small mammals. Indeed, none of our larger beasts are more so. There is something devilish and uncanny about it. It persists like fate. It eludes, but cannot be eluded. The terror it inspires in the smaller creatures, rats, rabbits, chipmunks, is pitiful to behold. A rat pursued by a weasel has been known to rush into a room, uttering dismal cries and seeking the protection of a man in bed. A chipmunk will climb to the top of a tall tree to elude it, and then, when followed, let go its hold and drop with a cry of despair toward the ground. A friend of mine walking along the road early one morning saw a rat rush over the fence and cross a few yards ahead of him. Pressing it close came a weasel, which seized the rat before it could gain the opposite wall. My friend rushed to the aid of the rat with his cane, but the weasel dodged his blows and in a moment or two turned fiercely upon him. My friend aimed more blows at it without effect. When the weasel began leaping up before him within a few feet of his face, its eyes gleaming, its teeth threatening, and dodging every blow aimed at it, the effect, my friend says, was singularly uncanny and startling. It was like some infuriated imp of Satan dancing before him and watching for a chance to seize him by the throat or to dash into his eyes. He slowly backed off, beating the air with his cane. Then the weasel returned to the disabled rat and attempted to drag it into the wall. My friend now began to hurl stones at it, but it easily dodged them. Now he was joined by another passerby, and the two opened upon the weasel with stones, till finally, in dodging one, it was caught by the other, and so much hurt that it gave up the rat and sought shelter in the wall, where it was left waiting to secure its game when its enemies should have gone on. Can you imagine that? Two men protecting a rat from a weasel. Most people are not real fond of rats, but that's just kind of funny. They felt bad for the rat. The weasel must be really scary. I must give one more instance of the boldness and ferocity of a weasel. A woman in northern Vermont discovered that something was killing her hens, often on the nest. She watched for the culprit and at last caught a weasel in the act. It had seized the hen and refused to let go when she tried to scare it away. Then the woman laid hold of it and tried choking it. When the weasel released its hold upon the hen and then fastened its teeth into her hand between the thumb and her forefinger. Oh boy, that hurts. She could not choke it off and ran to a neighbor for help, but no one could remove it without tearing the flesh from the woman's hand. Then someone suggested a pail of water. Into this, the hand and weasel were plunged. But the creature would not let go, even then, and did not until it was drowned. It wouldn't even let go when it was drowning. That is tenacious. The weasel is a subtle and destructive enemy of the birds. It climbs trees and explores them with great ease and nimbleness. I have seen it do so on several occasions. One day, my attention was arrested by the angry notes of a pair of brown thrashers that were flitting from bush to bush along an old stone wall in a remote field. Presently, I saw what it was that excited them. 3 large red weasels, or ermines, were coming along the stone wall and leisurely and half playfully exploring every tree that stood near it. They had probably robbed the thrashers. They could go up the trees with great ease and glide serpent-like out upon the main branches. When they descended the tree, they were unable to come straight down like a squirrel, but went around it spirally. And down they'd go. How boldly they thrust their heads out of the wall and eyed me and sniffed me, and I drew near. Their round, thin ears, their prominent, glistening, bead-like eyes, and the curving, snake-like motions of the head and neck being very noticeable. They looked like bloodsuckers and egg-suckers. They suggested something extremely remorseless and cruel. One could understand the alarm of the rats when they discover one of these fearless, subtle, and circumventing creatures threading their holes. To flee must be like trying to escape death itself. I was one day standing in the woods upon a flat stone, in what at certain seasons was the bed of a stream, when one of these weasels came undulating along and ran under the stone upon which I was standing. As I remained motionless, he thrust out his wedge-shaped head and turned back above the stone as if half in mind to seize my foot. Then he drew back and presently went his way. These weasels often hunt in packs like the British stoat. When I was a boy, my father one day armed me with an old musket and sent me to shoot chipmunks around the corn. While watching the squirrels, a troop of weasels tried to cross a barway where I sat. And our barway is like a gate. It's just anchored a little differently. So he was sitting near a barway. And these weasels were so bent on doing it that I fired at them, boy-like, simply to thwart their purpose. One of the weasels was disabled by my shot, but the troop was not discouraged, and after making several feints to cross, one of them seized the wounded one and bore it over, and the pack disappeared in the wall on the other side. They carried their wounded mate. That was kind of nice. Let me conclude this chapter with 2 or 3 more notes about this alert enemy of the birds and lesser animals, the weasel. A farmer one day heard a queer growling sound in the grass. On approaching the spot, he saw 2 weasels contending over a mouse. Both held the mouse, pulling in opposite directions, and they were so absorbed in the struggle that the farmer cautiously put his hands down and grabbed them both by the back of the neck. He put them in a cage and offered them bread and other food. This they refused to eat, but in a few days, one of them had eaten the other. Oh boy. Picking his bones clean and leaving nothing but the skeleton. Well, I guess they help their wounded mate, unless they're trapped and hungry. Oh my goodness. The same farmer was one day in his cellar when 2 rats came out of a hole near him in great haste. They ran up the cellar wall and along its top till they came to a floor timber that stopped their progress. When they turned at bay, and they looked excitedly back along the course they had come. In a moment, a weasel, evidently in hot pursuit of them, came out of the hole, but seeing the farmer, checked his course and darted back. The rats had doubtless turned to give him fight, and would probably have been a match for him. 2 rats against 1 weasel, maybe. The weasel seems to track its game by scent. A hunter of my acquaintance was one day sitting in the woods when he saw a red squirrel run with great speed up a tree near him and out upon a long branch, from which he leaped to some rocks, disappearing beneath the rocks, beneath them. In a moment, a weasel came in full course upon his trail, ran up the tree, then out along the branch, leaping from there to the rocks, just as the squirrel had done, and pursuing him into their recesses. Doubtless the squirrel fell a prey to him. The squirrel's best game would have been to keep to the higher treetops, where he could easily have distanced the weasel. But beneath the rocks he stood a very poor chance. I have often wondered what keeps such an animal as the weasel in check, for they are quite rare. They never need go hungry, for rats and squirrels and mice and birds are everywhere. They probably do not fall a prey to any other animal, and they are very rarely captured or killed by man. But the circumstances or agencies that check the increase of any species of animal are very obscure and but little known. So, and that's actually a quote from Darwin. So sometimes we just don't know how God has put a balance in there that they don't overrun. I really wouldn't like an over quantity of them around. Although ferrets seem a lot like them, and people make pets out of them. All right, so God bless you, and I'll be reading a little bit more. I hope you listen to the ant stories that I'm going to be reading too, because they're pretty fascinating. All right, God bless and goodbye.